Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next case study. I'm Michelle Daniluk, a professor and extension specialist at the University of Florida in the Department of Food Science and Human Nutrition. And I'm joined today by Dr. Shannon Coleman, who's an associate professor and state extension specialist at Iowa State University, also in a food science and human nutrition department. Shannon, great to have you here with me.
Thank you for having me.
Today, Shannon and I are going to talk through an outbreak that's related to one of the pathogenic E. coli 0157H7, and specifically related to strawberries. Shannon, do you want to give us a little bit of an overview about the commodity and about sort of where this outbreak came from?
All right, so this outbreak occurred in Oregon, and I did some of my own Googling research about Oregon and strawberries. And they are known for their strawberries. It's based off of the location of where they grow their strawberries. And they said in that area, there's a lot of family farm operations that have worked off of those lands for generations, um, and the berries are grown in the valley, and they're typically surrounded around mountains. And later on, when we talk about what caused this outbreak, it is usually mountains, that type of area. We will see a heavy presence of wildlife.
All right. And yeah, I think for me, one of the most interesting things about this outbreak was that it is that sort of very local production where the majority of the berries stay in state, have a very, very local market.
Yes.
And I think, yeah, the really interesting thing about this outbreak is that it was one of those smaller farms, very much a you-pick roadside stand sort of operation. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it really,
One of the papers that we read in the prep of this, they were saying for this one, the cases, they noticed that they were all local. Like usually with outbreaks, you'll see multi-state or a multi-state version of it. But this one, all of the cases came from a local person.
awesome. So Shannon, can you tell us a little bit about the farm associated with this strawberry outbreak?
All right. So, as far as the farm, it is located in an area that is known for wineries, aviaries, aviation, and they also have hot air balloon thing events. And so it's a really small town. Um, it's an urban farm because although they have those wineries, the mountains, and all of that, they're still, when I looked up a couple of videos about the town, because look, this is how I did my search. They had like this little small town, but like downtown part of it. So it was kind of considered an urban farm. And so they distributed their produce mostly on the roadside to local grocery stores and five farmers markets in the counties. Um, and when I looked up a little bit about the farm, they said that they originally started selling in one county, Washington County, and then where this outbreak occurred, they had moved to this area called Yamhill County, where I described before that they have these wineries. So there's agriculture that's going on in that area. So a place that you will see right now that a lot of local foods would be booming as a theme in that area.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that the focus a lot on that, right? About consumption of local foods, which I think is, again, like I said earlier, is what makes this farm so unique when we think about outbreaks for produce that we know about, is that it is sort of a local farm distributing, sort of only in 5 counties around there, and we don't see a lot of outbreaks like that, like you said, um, because we tend to see these large multi-state outbreaks, and this is a little bit different than that.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the outbreak?
All right. As far as the outbreak, there were 5 counties involved. Looking at the demographics of the cases, it caused a national outbreak of E. coli 0157H7, and it was traced back to contaminated strawberries. There were 15 cases. Majority of the cases were female. Median age was 68. And there were two hush cases that actually passed away, and they were greater than the age of 75.
Yeah, it's such an interesting outbreak again to me, because 15 cases, when we some of the other case studies we've done, we've had hundreds of cases, but I think this one is so important, because it is, just 15 cases, but those two deaths are such a tragic. Shannon, you mentioned Huss, in it being a contributing factor to those deaths associated with this outbreak. Can you tell us what Huss is?
It is stands for hemolytic uremic syndrome, and it's associated with sugar toxin producing E. coli, which is a foodborne pathogen and associated with the foodborne pathogen E. coli 015787.
Yeah, I think it's so important, not all foodborne pathogens are created equally, and that one Shannon just mentioned, E. coli 157H7, doesn't just cause the normal diarrhea we think about. This Huss syndrome that it leads to can shut people's kidneys down. So
Yeah.
it's pretty crazy of a disease to go there. The other really interesting thing I want to talk about about this farm is that because of its distribution, right now, if we look at it falling under any of the rules in the Food Safety Modernization Act, it would have been an exempt farm.
Yes.
Yeah, which again is so unusual for what we normally see. All right, so let's chat briefly about the sources of contamination in this outbreak. Where did that E. coli 0157H7 come from?
All right. And so as far as sources of contamination, as I mentioned before, it was traced back to strawberries. These during the trace back, they did environmental sampling, and they were confirmed using polymerase chain reaction, or PCR, which is a rapid detection method that's used to detect different, in our case, foodborne pathogens. And then there was also some subsequent culture confirmation, and then they also connected it back to deer pellets that were also sampled and confirmed. However, there were some issues as far as when we talk about doing culture work with foodborne pathogens. Typically, with the trace back or the investigation protocol, they usually use culture methods that usually lead to PFGE, which is a method that is used to subtype foodborne pathogens. And in this case, they were that some of them, well, in the paper that we were reading, it said that it was indistinguishable by that method. And that is usually the traditional gold standard method of how they usually subtype things. And so there's a big question between, as far as the epidemiologies of the of this case, of whether a big discussion between rapid method and traditional method that went on during this case.
Yeah, but it was those deer pellets itself. And one of the things that struck me when I read this sample was not only that, one of the things that struck me when I read this outbreak case study was not only that they found the E. coli in the poo, because we so often are never able to go back to a source in the field,
Mm-hmm.
but also that they saw the deer in the field while they were when they were up there doing their sampling, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, and they saw the deer in the field, and then the photo on the right there is actually a photo from the paper Shannon and I have both read and are talking about, where you can actually see the deer pellets and the strawberries sitting so close to them. And so such a rare occurrence in an outbreak to actually be able to see that sort of animal contamination right in the field. So I think pretty definitive link pointing back to the deer being the source in this outbreak. And I think that kind of a direct source puts us in a situation where we're able to learn some lessons, right, Shannon, and make some decisions and learn some lessons for all of us. So what are some of the lessons we can learn from
So
this?
some tools that many operators, whether big or small, can use from this lesson is in our Produce Safety Alliance training. There is a recommendation there of making sure that you evaluate your fields for animal intrusion, and that could be both domestic and wildlife. So as we talked about before, this outbreak happened in a mountainous region where we know wildlife is present. So you should do a constant monitoring of the fields to see if you see any traces of those the presence of animals. And so you can do that during the growing season as well as immediately before harvest. And we are talking about wildlife and domestic animals and all of that because these pathogens, such as E. coli, can transfer between the wild animals and domestic animals. And so that's why we're saying monitor the fields, because they transfer between themselves and also could transfer to the final produce itself, as we saw with these strawberries.
Yeah, the other thing I want to important point on this slide I want to point out was something that I know I get asked a lot about. Well, my commodity's never been involved in an outbreak before,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so this is the first time that strawberries were associated with E. coli 0157H7 or any pathogenic E. coli. And so I think that just is another example of how, given the right situation and opportunity, any produce commodity can be contaminated, right? Or
yeah,
could be contaminated with an organism.
yep,
The other thing, when I was reading, I read an epidemiologist review of this after sort of reviewing the papers, and what I thought was really interesting is that epidemiologist said, in this valley, in this small town, there was a previous E. coli 0157H7 case specifically linked back to those deer, so that the public health folks knew that those deer were spreading E. coli 0157H7 in the community. And so it's sort of sad that the farmer didn't know that as well, right? If it was a
yeah,
known fact in the area, that I wish that they would have been given that information or aware of that information as well. All
yeah.
right, so if we look at our growers, other growers that might be small growers with limited distribution as well, or growers trying to grow, what are things that they can do or things that they should learn from this outbreak so that something similar doesn't happen to them?
So you mentioned before, and this is what with the area of local foods that I work with. I work with a lot of people that are exempt from operation. And so I always tell them, I'm like, there is an opportunity that you can grow. And so that's why we suggest that you take certain trainings to help prepare yourself. And then the training, like the one I just mentioned, we have the Produce Safety Alliance trainings that are out there that has a section that talks about the presence of animals and wildlife, and it could give you suggestions on things to think about as far as um, mitigating intrusion on your field. So we know that, and that's a part of the training as well. We talk about co-management. We know that you don't want to disrupt the natural habitat that the of your area. And so, just doing some of those things that we mentioned before is making sure you evaluate your fields. There's also if you do see the presence of um, feces from animals, such as the image that we saw before, there is an option to set up a no harvest buffer zone, where you can put up stakes and tape, caution tape to tell the workers, or even remind yourself, I won't be harvesting from there because I saw that there was an outbreak from there. I know here in our state, for those exempt farmers, because of some funding that we have, the training, the PSA training, is at a very low cost. So even though you are exempt from having to follow these rules, it would be good just to get well informed on the food safety training and just start, figure out where you can start first as far as mitigating some of the risks that may be associated with produce safety in your operation.
Perfect. Thanks, Shannon. We are at the end of reviewing this outbreak. Is there anything else you wanna say about it? I know you work a lot with growers and with food processors that are smaller and exempt and growing. So any other words of advice or comments you want to add in here?
We are here to help. Contacting your local extension and outreach. There are very valuable sources out there, resources out there that can help you as far as getting your developing your product and getting it to market. And we always are looking for the next question that we need to answer. So always take the time to just find us and reach out.
Perfect. Well, with that, I will say Shannon's and my contact information is on the screen now. Feel free to reach out to either of us with questions about this outbreak or anything else in your operation. Thanks for listening and hope you learned a little bit about this outbreak associated with E. coli 015787 and strawberries. Shannon, thank you so much for joining us today. And thanks you guys all for continuing to watch our produce safety outreach projects, produce safety in minutes, funded by USDA. Thanks. All right. Now, how do I stop recording?